The second reset of Icecrown Citadel has gone by, which means once again it is raid review time. The Lich King fell on Heroic 25 in just over an hour and a half from launch. European Guild Progress claimed the world first here. Surely this means it's a face roll easy raid then? Well, I guess we're going to be finding that out, aren't we? I do have a few things to mention though before we get into the video. If you aren't aware, I've done this kind of mini raid review of progression after the second reset since Vanilla Classic. It's just a bit of a tradition on the channel. As to why the second reset, it seemed like a reasonable time frame for players to really get into the newer content. Maybe that's a bit less true nowadays with Heroic mode, but we'll stick with the format for Wrath at least. Also, Icecrown Citadel didn't come out on the usual reset day, it released on the Thursday globally. It was even a Friday in some time zones. So there has been less time to progress as a whole. As per usual, data will be coming from Warcraft logs, and yes, there is a bit of an overlap where North America's had their reset and Europe hasn't. It's definitely not super precise, perfect data, but it's just an interesting look into how the new raid is shaping up. So with all that said, let's make a start with the easiest bosses and work our way up to the hardest. To the surprise of absolutely no one, the loot ship lives up to its name. There were 7,893 progression kills logged in total. Don't ask me why this number is so low when we go to look at other fights, because I'm not entirely sure myself. 95.8% of pulls were successful. I can only assume this small volume of players left forgot to swap back to Heroic after Lady Death Whisper. In fact, there were 96 guilds who did just straight up not notice that the encounter was on normal, and completed the fight on this difficulty. There's not really too much to say about this fight. Even back in the day, everyone pugged this once per week for the free 227 item level gear. But if it's a gimmick fight, at least it's easy. Next is the first boss of the raid, Lord Marar. He had 9,278 kills total, 6,309 of those being on Heroic difficulty. The majority of raids wiped once on this encounter before getting it down successfully. Marar's signature ability, Bone Storm, can catch your raid off guard with poor positioning. Marar does feel like a good first boss to set the pace for the raid though. For our next step, we're skipping ahead quite a few bosses, all the way to the Plaguewing, as the next easiest encounter is Rotface. He suffered 9,750 defeats in total, with 5,605 of those being on Heroic. I have to say I'm not surprised to see this boss making an early appearance on this list. Mechanically, it is very simple. You stay spread, you kite the small ooze to the big ooze. When the boss calls out the big ooze is about to explode, you move a bit, and that's kind of the fight. There isn't a super strict enrage timer on the fight either, so you can very much land a messy kill with a bunch of dead players. Also, once again, pretty simple boss, a lot of very good loot. That's the nice thing about ICC, I guess. It's not just the very difficult end bosses who have all the good items. Onto the Frostwing for the next encounter. It's the second gimmicky fight of the raid for Liara Dreamwalker. This encounter was defeated 9,365 times in total. 4,112 of those were on Heroic, with a successful pull rate of 30.8%. This one is really about knowing which ad needs to be dealt with first and ensuring that you're at the right place at the right time. Despite it definitely being one of the easier encounters in the raid, it can still be quite easy to wipe should the fight go on for too long and you get overrun. And that is kind of it for the freebie heroics. From here on out, things start to get harder. Next up is Vestergut. He was defeated a total of 9,722 times, with 3,464 of those being on Heroic, and he had a kill to wipe ratio of about 18.9%. Again, it's not the most mechanically intensive fight, but it's here where personal responsibility, good positioning, and straight up just performing well starts to matter more and more. This fight will test your entire raid, from your healers on the AoE damage and spot healing, your DPS to beat the enrage timer, and your tanks not dying when the boss has max stacks and is hitting harder than Algalon did. This is also one of the bosses in the raid where during your first kill, you are quite likely to get close to the enrage timer. If you are just a bit off though, gear in ICC is super powerful, and it'll go from feeling quite close to super easy in the space of one reset. Next up is Deathbringer Sourfang. He was defeated a total of 9,731 times, with 3,201 of those on Heroic, with a kill to wipe ratio of 14.5%. He was also the boss with the most wipes on Heroic mode by far. He was the cause of just over 100,000 wipes. The next closest was Festagut, who was at about 68k. It really gives you the time to appreciate the unskippable roleplay before each pull. Man, I sure love unskippable RP. In fact, 100,000 wipes at 1 minute of RP is like nearly 70 days worth of listening to the same conversation, and I'm pretty sure the Horde has closer to 1.5 minutes of roleplay as well. Either way, people really want that heroic token and a chance at Deathbringer's will. Can't blame you there. The high wipe count in general is also not a surprise, as the fight is on the shorter end, but you can wipe in a single moment if a marked player dies and heals the boss, or if the boss just generates too much blood power early on and casts too many marks. As with many fights here, the OP gear from ICC will start to allow much easier kills after a few resets have gone by. Now we have the first end boss of one of the wings, Blood Queen Lanathel. This encounter was defeated a total of 8,050 times, with 2,662 of those on heroic, with a kill to wipe ratio of 20.1%. It's kind of similar to Festagut in a way that it's very a numbers battle to beat the enrage timer, but you also have to perform the bite mechanic perfectly to land your first kill. Always fun to see whose UI doesn't give them an extra action bar, inevitably causing a wipe, but once everyone has seen how this mechanic works, it's pretty simple to execute. I think this boss being a little later in the raid, and it being behind an even harder heroic, would have made many guilds put this on normal just to get it out of the way. Now, rather surprisingly, we have the second boss of the raid in the top 5 most difficult encounters, Lady Death Whisper. She was defeated 9,566 times, 2,656 of those were on heroic, with a kill to wipe ratio of 21.5%. Honestly, I reckon a lot of guilds gave this boss 1 or 2 tries, thought, you know what, this is a super early boss, let's not spend ages here, put it on normal and get it out of the way. Because when you do this boss on heroic, it is seriously chaotic. There are ads that need to be focused by either physical or magical damage, mind controls, repositioning, and that's just phase 1. And then in phase 2 you get to see who can dodge a ghost and who is going to blow up your entire raid. And just one of these ghosts reaching somebody and exploding can easily take out a handful of players, which will eventually spiral the fight into a wipe. It's a messy fight, but one you can eventually take down when you step back and focus on the mechanics, rather than just trying to blast a DPS or healing. Back to the Bloodwing now to take on the Blood Prince Council. They were defeated a total of 8,204 times, 2,076 of those were on heroic, with a kill to wipe ratio of 23.4%. What can I say about this fight? When I did it on the PTR, I was really surprised about how difficult this was compared to my somewhat limited memories of ICC from back in the day, and now seeing the stats on it, its difficulty is kind of confirmed. There is just a metric ton of things going on at the same time, and if many of them go wrong, you just instantly wipe. Whether it's the Shadow Bolt tank getting one-tapped, the orb swapping to Valenar and him instantly doing an empowered shock vortex, or the kinetic orbs hitting the floor. There is a lot of personal responsibility here to take care of, but it is a really mechanics-focused boss, which doesn't have a huge amount of health. So it's all about understanding the fight and staying focused on it. Which brings us to the top 3. Third is Synr Goa with 6,267 kills total, 1,014 of those were on heroic, with a kill to wipe ratio of 12.4%. Okay, I may have a thing or two to say about Synr Goa. So throughout Wrath so far, there have been some bosses which I wasn't really a fan of. First of all, it was Hodir. It was never really a difficult fight, but visually it was messy and you needed weak auras to really understand the fight. But it was a short fight and you can blast DPS, so it wasn't that bad. I had problems with Vezax too. You know the drill if you were doing this fight regularly, how you get the boss to 5% and then you just have to AFK for about 1.5 minutes so that the hard mode would activate. But again, Vezax wasn't too difficult. Synr Goa, however, is not easy, which makes it all that much worse because this has to be one of the worst designed boss fights I have ever seen in World of Warcraft. Okay, small asterisk before the rank continues, on normal mode it's fine, and if you're a melee player it's kind of fine as well. This is considering heroic playing as a caster or a healer. Do you know what the problem with this fight is? Unchained magic. It's a 30-second debuff, which, if you get it, the correct thing to do is pretty much just not play your character for 30 seconds, as when you cast you get a stacking debuff that will explode after it wears off. On normal mode, this debuff just hits you. On heroic, it hits everyone in an enormous range around you. Now in phase 1, you can cast a bit here and there, but not really that much. However, in phase 2, you absolutely cannot cast anything. If even 2 people AoE the raid, you can wipe off of that. And you can get Unchained magic back to back, by the way. Oh, and after the Unchained, there's an air phase where you can get put into a Frost Tomb for about 40 seconds or something. Once on the PTR, I had a pull on Synr Goa where I got 6 Unchained magic and 3 Frost Tombs. That's about 5 minutes of the boss fight where I pretty much cannot play my character. Who thought this was a good idea? On top of that, why does phase 1 have to go on for so long? You'll get 3 air phases on progression. That's about 6 minutes or so of, frankly, not a very difficult fight to get it to 35%, where the actual hard bit starts. And if you get there and start progression on phase 2, you'll see what I mean. But for me, this just is not a good fight. Anyways, after that abomination of an encounter, thankfully we have something which is fun to progress on: Professor Putricide. This fight was defeated 7,502 times, 850 of those were on heroic, with about 8% of pulls being successful. This encounter is a considerable step up from its normal mode version. Now during the transition phases, instead of just sitting in a stun and waiting, you have to deal with 2 adds at the same time. On top of that, your raid gets a debuff where they can only deal damage to one or the other. Getting these transitions down will be the first big hurdle in dealing with this fight. The final phase of the race to the end, as the boss will start to stack a debuff on the tanks. If the debuff gets too high, the raid-wide damage will be too much and you'll wipe, and if a tank dies with the debuff, the boss will heal and you're probably also going to wipe. It's an interesting fight mechanically though, where on a pull-by-pull basis things will go different based upon who gets which debuffs. This is one of those fights where you wipe and eventually things start to fall into place and it really doesn't seem that bad anymore. Either way, it's a good fight, which is a great thing because most guilds will be spending quite some time here, which only leaves one boss remaining, the Lich King himself. He suffered 3,094 defeats in total, 61 of those were on heroic, with a kill to wipe ratio of 0.5%. So I'm still currently progressing this encounter as of doing this video, but I can safely say that this is the most challenging encounter in Classic so far, by such an enormous margin that nothing before it even comes remotely close. Many of the top guilds put in 250 pulls or more on Lich King Heroic 25 on the PTR in order to be confident that they will be able to one-shot it when the raid released. And to do this encounter week 1 is the first time I can honestly say that Classic's difficulty was comparable to Mythic in retail. I'd say it's somewhere around a challenging mid to late tier Mythic boss. Not a Mythic M boss, let's not go that far, but it is not easy. It's a 15-minute fight where everyone has to be performing at a 99th percentile with 0 mistakes possible, or you just instantly wipe. As the weeks go by and we gear up more, the fight will become more forgiving, of course. Eventually we'll get the 30% buff too, we don't know when that'll happen, but it will do, at which point the fight should become a lot more manageable. Also, fun fact, out of the 61 kills currently logged, only 12 of them are Alliance. So I made a video at the start of this year where I said if nothing changed that top end players would gravitate towards the Horde over the course of Wrath of the Lich King due to racial bonuses. What we are seeing here is the real start of a series of events in retail, which eventually led to cross-faction play. History is really repeating itself here. Maybe Blizzard will change things in Kata in anticipation of this happening, but we don't know yet. I'll link the video though if you want to check it out. Another fun fact, for the vast majority of guilds out there, it will be easier to get Shadowmourne than any single item from Lich King 25 Heroic. I guess this was true back in the day as well, but if you have a bunch of Lich King 25 Heroic weapons on your BIS list, yeah, you're going to be waiting a while for that one. But those are our stats for ICC. However, Ulduar still holds up comparatively. Whilst Professor Putricide had 850 clears, ODR hard mode had 600, and and Mimiron had 598 by this point in time. As for the big end bosses, Yogg-Zero had 148, and Algalon had 119. Reminder, Lich King is at 61. So ICC really is top heavy in that the Lich King 25 heroic fight is just an insane difficulty step. And even without attempts, I don't think there would be a huge number of extra clears. You really do need a very stacked raid to think about clearing this encounter this early. But of course, all of these bosses pale in comparison to the true hardest boss of Wrath Classic, the undefeated, pre-nerf, hard mode XT002, who just had an impossibly large health pool for people to deal with. When Blizzard finally got to nerfing it, they knocked off over 20 million health from him. Either way, that will be the final 2-week raid review for Wrath Classic. I don't think Ruby Sanctum would make much of a video, but both Ulduar pre-nerf and Icecrown Citadel have most definitely given raiders looking for a bit more of a challenge something to enjoy. And you know what? Cataclysm is expected to be more challenging than this expansion's content, so if you've enjoyed the progression so far, you should have something to look forwards to. But let me know how you're getting on in ICC so far. Has it lived up to its reputation? Was it as good as you remembered it? Anything in between? Drop it down below. But as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.